It happened in the dead of night. At 3 a.m., three men posing as HOA inspectors tried to force their way into a black man's home. They weren't inspectors. They weren't officials. They were intruders with fake badges, crowbars, and a plan. But what they didn't know was that Malik wasn't just any homeowner. He was a retired Navy SEAL, and he was ready. But to understand how it got this far, you have to rewind to the afternoon before when those same men showed up bold as daylight, demanding to inspect Malik's home under bogus HOA rules. The Florida sun hung high, casting its heat over the neatly cut lawns of Cypress Glen. Malik Carter, a tall black man with the kind of presence that made strangers stand straighter, was out front sweeping the walkway while his daughter Amani played with sidewalk chalk. Jalen leaned against the porch rail, earbuds in, pretending not to watch. It was supposed to be an ordinary Saturday afternoon. That's when the men came. Three of them, walking side by side down the street, wearing reflective vests and clipped-on badges that looked shiny from a distance but cheap up close. One carried a clipboard, another a walkie-talkie, and the last, bigger than the rest, kept his hands buried in gloves that didn't match the heat. They stopped at the end of the driveway as if they owned it. "Mr. Carter?" The one with the clipboard called, his voice too loud, too formal, like he was reading from a script. "We've had several complaints. Your property requires inspection." Malik straightened, resting both hands on the broom. "Complaints?" His voice was calm, but it carried weight. "Funny, nobody said a word to me." The man flipped his clipboard as if that proved something. "It's HOA policy. We need access inside your home. Today." "You don't come to my house, not without notice," Malik said, "and you don't walk up demanding to inspect anything. My family doesn't answer to you." The big man in gloves shifted, his gaze sliding past Malik toward the front door. The smallest one tapped his badge with two fingers. "Rules are rules. If you don't comply, there will be consequences." Have you ever had strangers show up at your door, flashing fake badges and claiming they had the right to come inside your house? What would you do if that threat was aimed at your own family in your own home? Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where our viewers are tuning in from. And if you stand with families who refuse to bow to bullies, hit like and subscribe to Story Arc. We expose the frauds and stand with the people they try to break. Malik's jaw tightened. 20 years in uniform had trained him to read threats before they were spoken plain. He stepped closer until he was only a few feet from the trio, his voice low but firm. "This is my house. My children live here. You're not coming inside. Not today, not ever. So you can take your clipboards, your fake badges, and your threats and keep walking." For a beat, no one moved. The men exchanged a look, something cold, calculated. Then the one with the gloves leaned forward just enough to murmur, "We'll be back." They turned as abruptly as they'd arrived, walking down the street like nothing had happened. Malik didn't relax. He just watched, broom still in hand, knowing deep down this wasn't finished. It began in the dead of night, when the neighborhood was supposed to be silent. The first sound wasn't frantic, wasn't gentle. It was a knock. 3 deliberate strikes against the front door, like someone certain the family inside was asleep and too bold to care. Upstairs, the red glow of Jalen Carter's alarm clock read 3:15 a.m. The number itself felt wrong. Too early, too heavy. Jalen stirred in bed, unsure if he was dreaming until the second knock hit, louder, sharper, bypassing thought and landing straight in his chest. He sat up, heart racing, listening to a house that should have been still. This was Florida, their quiet street, the kind of place where trouble wasn't supposed to come knocking. He held his breath. Silence. And then, crash. Something downstairs toppled, not by accident, but shoved. A sharp shatter of glass echoed, followed by the dull thud of someone brushing past a wall. Jalen swung his legs to the floor, adrenaline already surging. That's when his door eased open and his sister appeared. 10-year-old Amani slipped inside like a shadow, pajama shirt twisted, her face wide with something he had never seen in her before, pure fear. "They're at the back door," she whispered, voice trembling. 3 men. I saw them from my window. They've got those orange HOA badges. Radios. One of them had a crowbar. HOA letters were annoying enough, grass-length mailbox paint, but they didn't show up armed at 3 in the morning. They didn't skulk around with tools meant for breaking in. He rose slowly, moving into the hall. From there, faint voices drifted up from the kitchen. Calm voices. Too calm, like men who weren't surprised or lost. This wasn't confusion. This was planned. At that moment, Malik Carter, their father, stepped into the hallway. His eyes scanned his son's face, reading fear, uncertainty. Something shifted in him then. A flicker, the kind of recognition forged in battlefields far from this quiet suburb. Malik didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Without a word, he crossed into the master bedroom. His footsteps were quiet, precise. Jalen followed close, hardly breathing, feeling the air itself change as his father moved with a discipline that belonged to another life. Malik pressed his thumb to the biometric safe, waited for the soft click, and opened it. Inside, everything was laid out in exact order. He pulled free the AR-15, checked it, loaded, chambered around, all in silence. Then he looked at his son. "Stay behind me," Malik said evenly. "If they come through that door, we end it." The house held its breath. Below the stairwell came the soft scrape of shoes on mulch, a practiced shuffle, then a voice too polite for the hour. "We'll say it's landscaping," one muttered. "Side entrance first. Make it quick. We warned them this afternoon. Remember how they waved us off today? Cute. They'll beg us for mercy by sunrise." The line was practiced, the cadence rehearsed, an attempt to manufacture authority. Jalen eased to the guest room window and cracked the blind just enough to see. 3 men lingered by the back porch. Cargo pants, mismatched reflective vests, cheap orange tags clipped to belts. One clutched a clipboard like a script, another spoke into a small radio. The third wore heavy gloves and kept his hand near something hidden beneath a pamphlet. And there it was, the glint of metal that didn't belong in an inspector's toolkit. A crowbar, half concealed, ready. Malik was already halfway down the stairs before Jalen finished taking it in. His movements were quiet and precise, the kind of economy of motion that came from years of training. He paused in the shadow of the hallway, rifle lowered but ready, listening to the men trip their own bravado. From where he stood, he could hear the back door handle rattle, a light tapping on the glass, then a metallic creep as pressure bent the frame. They were forcing it. Malik stepped forward until his voice could slide through the night without shouting. "Last warning," Malik said, each word slow. "Leave now, or you'll regret it," he said. The words were low, final. They didn't need to be loud to carry authority. For a heartbeat, everything froze. One of the men looked toward the house, puzzled, wondering where the voice had come from. Then the door went. A shove, a wrench, and wood splintered as the first intruder shoved across the threshold, shoulders squared, using his clipboard like armor. He moved with angry bravado, convinced a paper badge made him untouchable. Malik didn't hesitate. He brought the rifle up, aimed into the ceiling, and fired once. The muzzle flash illuminated the hallway like lightning. Plaster exploded in a soft fall, dust floating down like a gray snowfall. The sound shattered the intruder's confidence. The man's clipboard clattered, and he bolted, feet slipping on the wet deck, disappearing into the dark. There was no time to breathe. The second man slammed through next, this one moving with deliberate menace, and he had a handgun. Jalen watched, frozen as the metal glinted. Malik didn't call out. He acted. 2 shots rang out, precise, controlled. The first hit the intruder's shoulder. The second struck lower, unbalancing him. He collapsed to the tile, the gun skittering away under a chair. In the corner of Jalen's vision, movement at the side window turned into action. The lookout was trying to climb in. Adrenaline pushed Jalen down the stairs. He grabbed the cold iron poker by the fireplace, ran, and swung before the man's weight could clear the sill. The glass exploded. The intruder yelped and retreated into the night. For a long second after, there was only heavy breathing, a ringing in Jalen's ears, and the hiss of plaster settling. Then, faint but growing, the mechanical whine of sirens closing fast. The sound of sirens cutting the dark like a blade. Blue and red puddles of light rolled across the street, painting garage doors and hedges, waking neighbors who had no business being awake at this hour. Dogs barked. Curtains twitched. Jalen stood at the broken window holding the poker like a talisman. His lungs felt raw, like he'd been running. Malik didn't move from the kitchen doorway until the first patrol car nosed up the curb. Then he set the rifle down on the dining table, safety on, chamber open, exactly how he'd been taught to do it. He stepped back, palms open, fingers steady. "I'm unarmed," he called out, voice even. 2 intruders injured. 1 ran east. Kids are upstairs. Flashlights swept the living room. Officers fanned in, boots light but urgent on hardwood. The lead cop kept his weapon low, but his eyes were fixed and sharp. When he saw Malik, hands raised, calm, measured, the officer's posture softened just a fraction. You the homeowner? He asked, voice clipped, professional. Malik Carter, he answered. Former military. Kids are here. Everyone's safe. The officer signaled, and medics moved in to check the downed man in the kitchen. Malik had already done what needed doing, a dish towel cinched as a tourniquet, pressure where it counted. The wounded intruder groaned, face contorted in pain and confusion. Nearby, a discarded fake badge glinted in the flashlight beam, a cheap laminate, orange, the kind an online store could print by the dozen. Outside, a squad swept the yard. The second attacker, bloody at the shoulder, was still near the fence, cuffed and breathing hard. Another man, the lookout, had apparently tried to vanish into the brush but collapsed short of the neighbor's property. Officers moved to secure him. A K-9 team followed a scent into the trees, then lost the trail where the ground softened and the woods swallowed tracks. Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the lights and the noise. First 1 or 2 in slippers, then a trickle swelled into a small crowd on the sidewalk. Phones lifted, whispering like a wind through dry leaves. Questions tumbled. Was it a late-night inspection? Did someone really fire a gun? Had the HOA sent those men? A younger officer crouched by Jalen and kept his voice low, the kind that asked questions with care. You okay, son? Name? Jalen answered, voice thin but steady. Jalen Carter. I'm okay. The lead detective took Malik's statement, methodical, noting the sequence from the knock to the broken glass, to the warning shot, to the first intruder bolting. He nodded as Malik spoke. No theatrics, only facts. You handled this by the book, the detective said finally, the words carrying weight and a quiet approval that unclenched something inside Malik. Malik let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It wasn't relief. Not yet. But it was the first honest sound that wasn't laced with adrenaline. He glanced at his children, Imani huddled under a blanket in Jalen's arms, and felt the night tilt, the worst of it passing into officers' hands. The house still bore the scars, a splintered door, a cracked window, dust on the floor, but inside, where it mattered most, everyone was accounted for. The first responders moved through their tasks while Malik stood quiet, watching the professionals stitch the scene back into law and order. By the time dawn painted the sky pale, the flashing lights had dimmed, and the last of the scene was being cleared. Reporters lingered at the edge of the block, hungry for scraps, cameras eager. Word had already spread. Midnight break-in, armed homeowner, HOA imposters. Malik Carter wasn't surprised. Stories like this never stayed quiet. Hours later, with statements finished, the last squad car rolled away. Malik stood at the edge of his porch, staring at the cracked doorframe, the jagged teeth of splintered. The house looked wounded, but it was still standing. His family was still standing. Sometimes that was all the victory you could ask for. Behind him, Jalen's voice broke the silence. Dad? Malik turned. Jalen's eyes held something different now, something steadier, sharper. We're safe, right? Malik rested a hand on his son's shoulder. We're safe, he said simply. And in that moment, it was enough. If you believe every parent has the right to keep their children safe in their own home, smash that like button and subscribe to Story Arc, because some battles are fought not on the streets, but at the front door.